Everyone wants more money, but most of us weren't taught how to create an abundant life. That's where the law of attraction, manifesting success stories show comes in. If you are ready to have more money, create more freedom, and experience more fun, turn the volume up. It's time to learn how to create the prosperity and life you have been dreaming of. Here's your host, Cassie Parks.
Hello and welcome to this episode. I am your host and actually the only one here today. I am Cassie Parks, best-selling author, master manifester, and the coach who helps her clients make their dream lives a reality. So you've been listening to my podcast. If this is your first time, actually, welcome. Thank you. This is going to be a little bit different than episodes have been recently, but if you've been recently listening, you know I've been interviewing my clients in not just in one-off interviews like I was doing at one point, but I've really started to interview them on a continuous basis so that you get more of the picture. And there was sort of a break in between, things are shifting a little bit. I've got some cool stuff that I'll talk about later. And so for today and the next several episodes, it's going to be me because I want to be back in front of just like talking to you. I've missed that a little bit. Again, there was a space in the schedule and I said, what am I going to do? And I said, I'm going to take some of my manifesting stories. I think I'm a better teacher. You might have heard some of these stories before, but I know that I'm a better teacher. I'm better at paying attention to the little details that mattered along the way and help support that just because I've been doing this longer. I've been teaching it longer. I've been, getting the ahas with people longer. So I know what makes things click. And so I thought it would be fun for me to go through some of my favorite manifesting stories over the next several episodes, and then we will resume. I'm excited. We're probably going to have a year-end, an enchanted year-end wrap-up with some clients. We're going to talk about just looking at this past year. So some of these people are going to be people that you've heard from and you've heard their stories. And so you'll get a glimpse into what's coming, on the podcast next year when you get to hear their stories from this year. But you'll also get to hear some people that you haven't heard from before that I've been saving their stories because I have some really cool things that we're creating. And so and again, I'll get into that all, but I just want to give you a heads up about what's coming and tell you that I'm so excited to be here with you today. And I'm going to walk you through some little bits and pieces because as I'm going to teach you and talk about a little bit later, I believe in the backstory. I think there's so many parts that go into manifesting, and it's important to learn how to recognize those because it builds our faith, it builds our confidence, it builds our trust. It also allows us to trust in inspiration more. And so I believe in that backstory. I believe in all those little details, like this happened and then this happened and then this happened and this was part of it. And here's how I applied some of the techniques that we talk about. Because, if you're here and you're listening, manifesting success stories, if that's what attracted you in, you're probably familiar with manifesting and the law of attraction, so you know some of these things. And my intention with these next episodes where I'm the host, the only, and telling stories and sharing with you and connecting about manifesting tidbits and applications and how it all works is that you can see better how it works. You can take some of those things that have to do with manifesting, like I've mentioned already, trust, inspiration, asking what you really want, and you can see how those have been applied to some of my stories and my most fun and most successful manifestations, because some of my most fun manifestations they're not even the big stuff, right? They're things that aren't living at the Four Seasons or my house or the love of my life, but they're a couch and they're important. And I'm going to talk about all of those because there's lessons in all of those. And so that's my intention for these next several episodes while you get to hear me, is that you are learning like sort of this backstory and you're learning how those things that are supposed to be used in the law of attraction, or you're supposed to do, or you're supposed to figure out like how those go into some of my stories, because I know because I know a lot about how the brain works. And I believe, story is how we learn. And that's why I do this podcast the way that I've actually always done it. So if you've been around since the beginning, when this show was called Happy Ever After, thank you for being here. And you've seen the evolution, and you know that even back then, I believed in telling our story and telling how things happen. It's such an important part of manifesting. It's an important part of learning anything, because we learn better through story. We really do. Think about something that really stuck with you. There's probably a story with it. It wasn't just a fact or a figure, but you understood that. Our brains latch on to stories. And I truly believe that's because our ancestors, that's how we passed on information. Our ancestors a long time ago, we told stories with morals and lessons to teach the next generation how to do things. And so that's how our brain learns to pick up a lot of information. And it's more entertaining. Story has such a great power, and that is why I share stories on this podcast, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's what we have on the agenda coming up. I love it. I'm excited. I do have a one-day event coming up to celebrate my Freedomversary on November 1st. So if you're interested in that, you can check out my website and learn about the event, learn how to manifest money. It's just going to be a one-day Zoom event. It's going to be amazing. I'm excited about it. You can check that out if you're interested. And I just want to get into it. So I'm excited to talk to you today. I'm excited to be here. And today's story is about this podcast. So you might have heard me catching myself before I kind of went down a path and, in the intro. I wanted to give you a little backstory and what's happening. You just heard Mia's story, and even, if you listened last week, you heard about her opening up and vulnerability. And one of the reasons I love sharing stories is because we get to see what it takes sometimes to even get to a place of opening. And I think in a lot of ways you heard that with Mia. You've been listening to her for a couple years, and, you got to hear this, she's done a lot of work, and now it's time to ask for more. And so now she's opening to more vulnerability. And so you're getting to hear that. And so you just wrapped up Mia's story. If you haven't heard all Mia's story, you can go back the last 5 or 6 episodes. There's also, Mia has another little season, not little, it's powerful, but it's 5 or 6 episodes that you can go back to and listen to before. And like I said, after this episode, we'll get back into sharing my clients' stories, but I just wanted a chance to come back and hang out with you. So let's talk about the podcast and how this is a manifestation. It is so a manifestation. And it's a lot of little manifestations, but also this big intention, right? So I'm going to go through keys, and I'm going to hit on those LOA things. So if you've followed me for very long, you know that one of the biggest things that I ask, and is a game changer, and may or may not be taught in a lot of LOA things, is what do you really want? We are taught all the time, ask for what you want when you're doing LOA. But what I think is most important, and what really gets your brain to a new place, is when you ask, what do I really want? And for me, you'll hear this story, I'm sure, in this podcast, or when I do this next year, or in this series or next year. You'll hear about how that is what led to my financial independence, coming back to that, what do you really want? And so this question is big for me. And when it comes to the podcast, it started with that. After I left my job, my financial independence, I want to start this, or grow my coaching business, which had never worked before. And I said, okay, what do I really want? And when I answered that question, this was the answer. I want to coach people on the law of attraction, and I want to interview people about their stories of successful manifesting. That's what I said to myself. And I'm like, oh, okay. Now, what I meant in that moment was, or what I thought that looked like, I didn't have I didn't spend a lot of time, and I'm going to talk about this in the next point, but I didn't spend a lot of time envisioning what this would look like, because I stayed in the love of the feeling of it, which is the next point sort of that's important for LOA in this story. But when I said that's what I want to do. I want to interview people about the law of attraction. I want to coach people on the law of attraction. That's what I want to do. That's just what I want to do. And so I think I thought, based on information I had at the time, I was willing to let that intention go. I wasn't going to into any house because I knew the power already of when I asked that question and I answer it, how it just happens. So it was easy for me to let go, which is another point we'll talk about in a second. But I think in my mind, I was like, oh, I'll just interview people and I'll find all of these people to share stories because, like I mentioned in, the first 5 minutes, I like the backstory. I like the detail because those are the details that help our brain believe. Those are the details that when we know those about other stories, like that's really, it's not what you learn step by step in a book, but those are the things that seep into your brain, help you believe, help you trust, help you understand, help you follow inspiration. All of those are so important. And so I just wanted to have fun and talk about the law of attraction and manifesting. And so I think I thought it would be with just other people, right? Like I didn't ever imagine that it would be my clients and that I would have, oh man, in the queue, I have so many episodes for you. I have so much cool stuff to share with you about journeys and stories. I'm actually taking a group of clients in about 2.5 years. We'll start releasing their story because we'll have 5 years of doing the work, and having, working with your future self 5 years out and what that journey looks like. And I'm so excited to share that with you because there's so much power in surrendering to, it's okay if this takes 5 years. It's okay if this takes time. I don't have to have it tomorrow. There's just a power in that journey and you can manifest so much faster with that. And so getting a little bit back on track. The first question was asking myself, what do I really want? And what I wanted to do was talk to people about the law of attraction and manifesting. And I wanted to coach people on that. That's what I wanted my life to be filled with, in addition to real estate and all the other things that it was already filled with, hanging out with my family, being easy, it being fun, being able to travel whenever I want. And that's what I do. Like the majority of anything that's like, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, work for my business, because I love it all. I love everything that I do, and the things that I don't want to do, I let someone else do, right? I'm to that place where I just do the things that I love. And that's what I do. I coach people on the law of attraction and I interview them about their stories. Like the way that it ended up sweeter that I could ever imagine is that I get to share the stories that I've been honored to be on, that I'm honored to be on the journey of the creation of the story. That didn't totally come out right, but I'm honored to get to share the stories that I get to share with my clients that say yes to that, but I'm also honored to be on the journey. And so for me, that's way beyond when I said, what do I really want? Talk about LOA and teach and coach LOA. That's way beyond it because it came together in this beautiful, amazing way where I get to share with you and highlight and brag about how awesome my clients are and really talk to them and help them reflect on their journey. Doing these interviews, like thank you for all of you that share that these are awesome. They're good for you and they're good for the person who does them. Which reminds me of one thing. If you love anyone's stories, if you love this, will you please go to iTunes and leave a review? I would love to read about how stories are impacting you. And if, Kate's or Mia's or Vicky's or Polly's or someone's story really stood out and made a difference to you, I would just write that in the review and I will share that with them for sure. So to point 2, point 1 that I did in this manifesting journey was ask myself, what do I really want? Point 2 was love the feeling and let it go. So love that idea that I would just love to talk about manifesting and teach manifesting all day. And then I just let it go. Like know how, just, yeah, that would be awesome. And so that the most dominant vibration and feeling associated with that intention is just the fun of what I wanted. So I did that. I let it go. Like I didn't even start this podcast for probably a year or 2 after that moment. And even then I didn't see or think about what's happening now. That's all been an evolution. So after letting it go, we set intentions and we start to attract the things that are going to help us, both opening up our brain to see things differently and helping connect some of the dots for us. And that's what started happening with me, but I didn't realize it. I didn't know that it was connected to that because, again, I had loved the feeling of, yeah, that would be awesome and that's what I want, and I let it go, right? And so, but what happened when I look back is I can see that I attracted someone into my life who was doing something similar to what I'm doing now, but way different, not even close to what I'm doing, right? It was a little thread that I needed to sort of just give my brain like, there's a little possibility in there. Again, it was nothing like this. And it didn't feel the same way, but it was just like, oh, there's sort of a possible way to sort of share this and do it. And so I started attracting little experiences like that. And along the way, this is so important for manifest. So that's not really a step, but it's just to know. Like if there's one thing to know, it's that when you set an intention, you're automatically starting to attract those things that are going to lead to inspiration, that are going to open your brain up to possibilities of the path that are going to help you get there. Like that happens automatically. And if you could trust that, that will help you put down that how thing that gets in the way so often. So I started attracting that, and I mentioned that because it's part of the swirl. It's part of what makes this beautiful tapestry of this podcast and this experience and this manifestation. And along the way, I honored who I am and what I know, which is this. I love celebrating. There's a sign right next to me that says, "But first, champagne." I believe the more you celebrate, the more you create to celebrate. And that's who I know that works from an LOA perspective, right? When we start celebrating, we create more things to celebrate. And so if you do anything after this podcast, if there's one thing you do that if you haven't been celebrating, find something to celebrate right now or as soon as this podcast is over. Think about it. And so I was just celebrating because I love celebrating, and I also know it creates more. And so I just took that love of celebrating and honoring myself in that I love celebrating. So how can I do that? How can I involve other people? How can I get more of that? And so my first inspiration was really a manifesting success stories call. It was probably on TalkShoe. I could probably find it if I looked for it. But I just asked all the people who'd taken Manifest 10K in the last couple of years, like, do you want to come on and share your story? Like, let's celebrate. And it wasn't even about sharing their story. It was, let's come on and celebrate. Because as much as I know if we celebrate the stuff in our own lives, that there's more to celebrate, I also know that if we celebrate other people, especially their manifestations and them using the law of attraction to get what we want, we get, ignore that alarm, that was for the Enchanted Circle call later. If we honor other people's manifesting, we get even more energy in our manifesting. We get more belief. We get to envision ourselves, even if you're not totally conscious of these things. You start to envision yourself as that person or a person celebrating something similar. That's what happens when we start celebrating other people. So again, there's another thing you can take away. Help, celebrate others. And so that started, and that was really fun. And I think my idea, probably the how part was like, I should do this every month, but really the inspired part was just to do it. And so it didn't feel good to keep pushing it. So I just let it be. And then the next thing that came up is that someone who lived in Colorado, she did Manifest 10K for the second time, and she manifested $20,000. And I was inspired. I said, why don't you come celebrate? I was living at the Four Seasons at the time. I said, come down, celebrate. And again, this is where you sort of attract and you follow inspirations that are all supporting each other. I had recently done a $10,000 photo shoot where I got $10,000 actual cash out of the bank and took it with me to the photographer and did a photo shoot. And if you've heard some other interviews or different things, different places, you've probably heard more detail about that. But I had done that, and it was powerful. And that was an inspiration. It was an inspiration actually that happened when I transitioned money to manifest 10K. And, so 10,000 was the number, and I was inspired to do a $10,000 photo shoot. And I was like, oh, I could do that for someone else, because I love to celebrate. And of course I want to celebrate that someone's manifested not just $10,000, but $20,000, and we can do it with $10,000, right? And so I said, do you want to come do this? I'll lunch, we can come do a photo shoot. I don't know how I'll use the photos, but if you let me use the photos, I'll do this for you. And she said, yeah, that sounds fun. And as it got closer, I said, well, let's do it as a Facebook Live. Like, let's share this, because again, I love sharing, celebrating. I love sharing success. I love sharing using the law of attraction. These are all just things that, again, so that's inspiration. It's, following inspiration. Hey, let's celebrate. Hey, let's do it Facebook Live, which were also, they were in alignment with honoring who I am, which is an important and what I know to be true. And that's an important LOA thing to do, right? So we were inspired. That was awesome. I got so much feedback. That was very fun, and a new experience that opened me to a whole world, because I had like friends, uncles that I ran into at graduations 6 months later, and they're like, oh man, I watched that Facebook Live with you and that woman and that money, and it was so fun. And so it was just opening up and sharing that celebration with people I didn't even know would be celebrating with us. So again, just being true to me and sharing and honoring. And so I think one of the things, so those are important points, right? Follow inspiration, honor who you are. And what you also have to do, I would say, is an LOA thing to get what you want, is you have to be okay following inspiration that might not have a destination, or where the destination changes. And for me, I'd done that photo shoot, and it was so fun. And then I ended up being inspired to do Manifest 10K Live. And I had a couple more people who came to that event who had been successful at manifesting and changing their lives. And I was like, oh, let's do a photo shoot with them. And so that was inspiration. And then there was an inspiration. I was going to do a magazine, because again, I love sharing stories. Even though this hasn't come to fruition yet, there's parts of it swirling out there that have been done. It just never got done, because there's a lot of reasons, and that might come up in a different, but mostly because it wasn't inspired. It wasn't being backed by inspiration anymore. It was being forced. And even though I loved it, and even though things can start as inspiration, it doesn't mean that's the destination. And when I look back now, I can see that following that inspiration to do the magazine and get the photos and tell the stories was really leading me here, right? And so it doesn't matter. And maybe someday that magazine will come out and I'll be sending that to you every month, and it's totally a possibility. And when it's inspired, it'll be awesome. But I followed the inspiration of that until it didn't feel inspired. And it really was instrumental. And so that is an LOA key. Be okay following inspiration with no destination, or with a destination that changes. And somewhere along this point, and all of this is coming together. And remember, it's never just a straight line, right? Manifesting is not just a straight line. Even though I try to put it in as straight a line as possible to teach you, it's never straight. You go over in this cul-de-sac for a minute, and then you keep going, and you get out for a scenery break, and you do all these things. As following inspiration, and I at that point had already followed inspiration to have this podcast, to tell my story, and I already believed that stories have the ability to change us. And I think stories are, I don't think I know. Stories are just as important as like the how-to guide, the step-by-step, the do this and then do that, because the stories, they supplement, and they can seep into our brain in a different way. They hit us emotionally instead of logically. And we need all the parts of our brain to create and grow and learn and to implement this stuff. And so I knew story was important, which is if you go way back to the beginning of the podcast, and I was talking about my story and my journey and sharing with you again how LOA played a role in it. I was sharing that because I know that's as important as the tips and the tools and the how-to and the 10 steps and the 3 ways and all of that, right? And so I already had the podcast, and I just started, I was getting, emails from people, and, people were sending me money, because this was back when Manifest 10K was pay after you manifest still. And so when I'd get a check or I'd get a PayPal, people would include the story in the comment, or they'd send me an email, or they'd send a check in the mail with a card, and they'd say, oh my gosh, this is what happened. This is how I got so much money. And this is why I'm sending you this amount of money. And one day I was just inspired to start asking, like, oh, do you want to share that story with other people? Because nothing, I don't think, impacts our belief. There's 2 things that really impact our belief. Experience. But before we get experience, the LOA works. The thing that helps us believe is other people's stories, especially when we can find similarities to other people. We can find similarities to their age, their ethnicity, their their gender, their what they do for a living, their how old they are, where they grew up. Like, any similarity that we can find makes us believe, and there's always something, right? But some are bigger similarities than another, which is why I also started to interview more people, because what I said is my story can impact a lot of people and it can make a lot of people believe, but the more people that there are, the more stories, the more things there are to connect to about having similarities, the more our brain believes that can be me too. And so I just started to ask people, would you want to share this to support someone else and to help them believe this is possible? And I started getting yeses. And again, this falls in line with what I said in the beginning and what is true. I believe in the backstory. I believe it's not just, oh, I said, I want this and it showed up, right? There's always a journey, right? Even if the journey is letting go and remembering that we let go and then it was like, oh, and then it showed up. There's always a journey, right? And a lot more times the journey is like, oh, I set this intention and then I did this and then I worried about this and then I had to let go and then I learned this. There's all these twists and turns in it, right? And that backstory is where the important information is. And that's where you learn, I believe it's where you learn the most about the law of attraction. It's where those lessons can seep in, like hidden by a story, and they support your manifesting better. And if that's ever been true, or you have experienced like, oh yeah, so-and-so is on your podcast and I recognize this similarity in myself, and then I believed a little more that I can manifest, please leave that in an iTunes review. I would love to read about that. So, again, just following what I believe, which is in the backstory, and then telling that story and following that inspiration of asking people and having people say yes. And then, I had an inspiration. I said, oh, what if I do it for a year? Because yes, it's so fun. And the backstory we can tell in a half an hour or an hour is awesome, but you always forget parts. Like everybody, especially when you're in the story, you forget parts unless you're, it's easier sometimes for coaches like me, or if you've heard Manifest It Now, Jenny, because we pay so much attention to all the pieces because we've trained ourselves to do that. But a lot of people that are using the law of attraction don't always do that because it's just, what are you going to use that information, right? It's not the most important information, but it is part of what makes the story. And so, I knew that when I was interviewing people in like a 30-minute segment, a couple months after the fact, that we were missing things, even when I was interviewing some of my current clients. And so that, and then just this inspiration to really get deep into the backstory and to show you that growth it's messy and it's not always sunshine and roses. And yet it is so freaking beautiful and amazing. And the outcome is awesome. Wanting to continue to show that, I had an inspiration to do a year. And I just said to some of my current clients, I said, hey, do you want to come with me on this journey? I want to interview you for a year and release it a year at or actually back then we were doing it, it would kind of go in order. So it would go like Kate, Mia, Vicky, Polly, Kate, Mia, Vicky, Polly. There were more people than that. Those are just who I happened to look at the schedule on today. And so they're fresh. But I said, let's do this over a year. And then I said, ooh, what if we did it and we put them all back to back so that you could hear the change. Like every week that you listen to the podcast, you're hearing the changes that happened over a month or 2 months, and you could really see the growth. And I knew it would be good for my people. And I said, so do you want to do it? Because I know that remembering the story, if you're the person whose story it is, it helps your trust and your confidence. And it reminds you telling that story like, oh yeah, I was a little scared in that moment. Or, oh yeah, that day wasn't good, but it turned around when I did this, right? And so I said, you want to come along for the ride? And they said yes. And then I got so many yeses that there was an inspiration that I said, ooh, like what if I did 5 years? What if we showed that, because I have a passion, one of my passions and the thing that I feel called to change is this belief that change is quick. Change can happen quickly, but growth and the long term and creating the life you love takes a commitment of being in it for a long period of time. Because that's what gives the magic time to work out and everything to come together. And so, knowing that 5 years is really what we work with when we work for the future self, I ask people like, oh yeah, you want to do this for 5 years? And the answer is yes. And so I have a lot of stories that you'll get to hear the full 5 years in a row in a couple years, which is awesome. So that's sort of where we are. And I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm going to start wrapping up, but I do want to share evidence. And then as this has grown, even recently, as I see some shifts and changes, because what happened is I have so many people that say yes. I was like, oh, if you heard Manifest It Now, I think last year I shared this story where I had to ask myself, okay, how do I have more space in my life and get to still do all these awesome interviews? And when I asked it that way, and stayed true to me and what feels good, which is supporting all of my clients that want this experience, I want to give them that. Because I love it and I love it for them because it helps them grow faster. And so the answer that came, as I just kept asking that question for a couple weeks, or it might have been a couple months, was just to sort of shift some stuff up and to change the way I was recording and do it. And even now, like I've had even more clients say yes. And I said, okay, again, I started adding up the numbers. All right, if I'm doing a 5-year journey and I have this many people say yes every year, first of all, we're gonna have so many episodes when we get to 5 years. And second, there's hours in the day that feels good to work for me, right? There's an abundance of hours, but there's also, I want it to fit because that's what feels good. And I want to be able to both do my interviews and love and enjoy my whole life. And so as that came about, it was sort of intertwined with something that shifted in the workshop. And so you're going to even see that change. And that inspiration came just by letting it like, okay, how do I get more of this? This is where I know I'm going. This is what I want. This is also what I want. Just how do I get both of those? And letting that answer come is super huge. And so as I've been what I would call up-leveling this whole interview and this podcast and all of these things, I've been getting such great evidence. I got evidence watching The Last Dance on Netflix about the Bulls. Like there were so many moments and just it was so interesting to me that, I think it was 93, I can't remember if it was 93 or what year it was, but the Bulls, I think it was 93, let a camera crew follow them everywhere. Like nobody knew this documentary was what that was going to be used for, but somebody had the forethought to say, hey, this is going to be special. Like, let's record it so we can maybe tell the story later. And the story, 20 years later is being told. And so there's evidence. There was evidence when I was recently watching The Office. I love The Office, but I never finished it for whatever reason. And I was watching it it's just one of my go-to fun things. And, it's one of the things that makes me feel abundant is just to be able to watch The Office for an episode in the afternoon. And I got to the end of what I had never seen. And there were so many words at the end of The Office, even though it's a created show, that reflected the things that I want and that I know get said about the people who do this interview series. And so it was just, again, amazing evidence. And I've seen so many documentaries about the journey and the story lately that I can trust even more the inspiration that's here for this podcast. It's just been so important to allow the podcast to evolve with what I want and what feels good, and getting to do it all. Getting to support my clients with their growth and getting to do it all, and knowing and trusting that this is growing, which means there's another answer. There's another, even when it grows, it's always up leveling. As it gets bigger, it's always also up leveling, as long as I open this space. So that brings us to today, where there was just a little space that I had in the schedule, as the schedule has evolved for the podcast. And I said, what am I going to do? And I said, I would love to talk and hang out with you guys one-on-one, be in your ear when you're walking, or if you're back to driving to work, awesome. And so I just want to say thank you so much for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed this sort of step-by-step and really seeing how these law of attraction principles, or the things that you're supposed to do or that you've heard make a difference, how they've impacted this particular story, which is about this podcast. I will be back with another story breakdown of something else that I manifested next week. So make sure to come back and hang out with me, and have a fabulous week.
Thank you for joining us on the Law of Attraction Manifesting Success Stories show. To learn more about enrolling in the Enchanted Circle, go to CassieParks.com.